Parker's A to Z's of Horror. We are getting close to the end. We've got 2 months left. It's crazy. Whoop. Today, we are going to the letter S. S is for sorceress. The American novelist Shirley Jackson, 1919 to 1965, is perhaps best known for her novel, The Haunting of Hill House, 1959, which was made into a very fine movie, The Haunting, 1963. She is also known for a classic short story, The Lottery, 1948. Jackson is described now as a pioneer of what has been termed modern Gothic, where houses and neighbors are never quite what they seem. I very much dislike writing about myself or my work, she once said, and when pressed for autobiographical material, can only give a bare chronological outline which contains naturally no pertinent facts. Born in San Francisco, she spent most of her early life in California. In 1940, after graduating with a BA from Syracuse University, she married the critic and pneumatist Stanley Edgar Hyman. They settled in the quiet rural community of Bennington in Vermont. Our major exports are books and children, she said, both of which we produce in abundance. She described her book, Life Among the Savages, 1953, as a disrespectful memoir of her children, Lawrence, Joan, Sarah, and Barry, and she followed it in 1957 with an equally whimsical sequel, Raising Demons. Shirley Jackson claimed to be the only practicing amateur witch in New England. She owned a Ouija board, tarot cards, and more than 500 books on the occult. In her obituary, her friend, the critic Brendan Gill, told how she believed she had caused an accident to an enemy by making a wax image of him with a broken leg. My mother was a great student of the supernatural, says Lawrence Hyman. On the back of the book, it would say that she writes on a broomstick rather than a pen. My mother did, in fact, say she was a witch, agrees Joan Hawley, that she used her witchy powers. In the kitchen was a drawer. Shirley wouldn't open it up, and she'd need something, and it wouldn't be there, and she'd slam the drawer, say its name, and open it up, and it'd be on top. I've seen her do it. I can't do it myself, but I've tried. According to Sarah Stewart, my mother believed in the power of inanimate objects to pack a wallop, as she used to say. When she gave me the typewriter, she said, there are more stories left in that typewriter. My mother saw strong personalities in cats and cars. I certainly remember her driving and urging her car to do certain tricks, and then almost always it would. She believed that houses also had personalities. She spoke often and strongly of the wills of inanimate objects and hoped to affect them with her will. She and I used to drive around the countryside looking for buildings that she could use, recalls Lawrence. She didn't look at buildings so much from an architectural point of view, but from a personality point of view. The house was filled with music all the time, he continues. My mother played the piano, my sisters and mother sang. My parents had a great music box that actually once belonged to my great-grandfather, and it was one of my mother's most prized possessions. However, it was clear early on that the music box was haunted. It would turn itself on. In the middle of the night, it would start playing itself over and over when no one had wound it. I think my mother really did believe in the supernatural things. If something happened, it was because magic was behind it. Aside, Shirley Jackson is unparalleled as leader in the field of beautifully written, quiet, cumulative shudders. Dorothy Parker. I took my coffee into the dining room and settled down with the morning paper. A woman in New York had twins in a taxi. A woman in Ohio had just had her 17th child. A 12-year-old girl in Mexico had given birth to a 13-pound boy. The lead article on the woman's page was about how to adjust the older child to the new baby. I finally found an account of an axe murder on page 17 and held my coffee cup to my face to see if the steam might revive me. From Life Among the Savages by Shirley Jackson. The supernatural is the final dark corner in the desolate room where Jackson's isolated protagonists, usually women, find themselves. From The Penguin Encyclopedia of Horror and the Supernatural, edited by Jack Sullivan. Perhaps more than anything else, the horror story or horror movie says it's okay to join the mob, to become the total tribal being, to destroy the outsider. It has never been done better or more literally than in Shirley Jackson's short story, The Lottery, where the entire concept of the outsider is symbolic, created by nothing more than a black circle colored on a slip of paper. Stephen King. Shirley Jackson. Despite being said to suffer from obesity, asthma, arthritis, and acute anxiety, Jackson was also described as a neat, cozy woman whose blue eyes looked at the world through light horn-rimmed spectacles. And she would only write after she had completed all of her household chores. According to Barry Hyman, one of the earliest memories I have of my mother was her in the kitchen, the warmth, the light, the feeling of my family and security. But I realized there was more going on than that when I became aware of the typewriter going on all the time. She tried to type 10 pages a day, a first draft. She just kept working, and I think that, in a sense, was her therapy. She would always inevitably go up to her room, says Lawrence, shut the door, and type, and we could just hear her up there. She'd type for half an hour or 2 or 3, whatever time she had, while at the same time running a household and keeping up with 4 very active children. Joanne recalls taking naps as a little child or going to sleep at night. My entire life, always the sound of the typewriter pounding away fast, very fast typing. At those times, we didn't even talk to her, Sarah says. She wasn't our mother then. She was the typing person, and she wouldn't be kind to us or hear what we wanted. She was working. With a careful manipulation of atmosphere and lonely, often unreliable narrators, much of Shirley Jackson's fiction expertly balances psychological instability with an ambiguous supernatural horror. She was masterful at taking commonplace events, says Lawrence, and turning them into spine-chilling horror stories by letting the reader become comfortable enough to let down their guard. Leonard Brown, to whom she later dedicated The Haunting of Hill House, her English professor at Syracuse University, told her that the aim of writing is to get down what you want to say, not to gesticulate and impress. It was a lesson she never forgot. She'd write a story, says Joanne, and trim it to the least possible number of words. Then she'd substitute the most vivid word possible for every adjective or noun so that the reader could see it, so that reading itself wasn't a conscious act. It just jumped from her pen to your mind. Her first novel, The Road Through the Wall, was published in 1948, but it was the publication of The Lottery in The New Yorker in August that same year that brought her fame and controversy as an author. And then we have a list of books by Shirley Jackson. And the aside says, reading The Haunting of Hill House first in my teens, I found it genuinely don't turn out the lights frightening, and it went immediately into my pantheon of really scary, along with certain short stories by M.R. James, Walter de la Mare, and L.P. Hartley. Like those other writers, Jackson invokes terror less by what she says than by what she doesn't say. Lisa Tuttle. And then we've got some pictures here. According to Sarah, she wrote in 2 hours this story that will probably never die. When she was pregnant with me, my mother read The Lottery to me at the kitchen table. I must have been around 7 or 8. I remember hearing it, then feeling that I had to go and hug her, and also not wanting to. The story was written 2 or 3 years after the end of the Second World War, says Barry. I think the point of The Lottery is to make people realize that anyone and everyone can convert to mob behavior, and that's where the horror sets in. The lottery, in a sense, is just a statement of how far people can go, normal people, everyday people. Only if you understand this, how humans can quickly cross the line into unacceptable behavior, do you have a chance to put the brakes on it and step back. Don't join the crowd. Don't throw one of the stones. It created an enormous controversy, and the mail just poured in, recalls Lawrence, more letters than any story they had ever received. Many readers canceled their subscriptions to The New Yorker. The tale was decried as violent, pointless, and un-American. People wanted to know what it meant, but when asked, Jackson said, well, really, it's just a story. The story was reprinted in the collection The Lottery, or The Adventures of James Harris, in 1949, and she adapted it for television the following year. In 1951, she published Hangs a Man, a description of college life with a fantastical edge, and followed it with The Bird's Nest in 1954, the story of a woman with multiple personalities. It was filmed as Lizzie in 1957, starring Eleanor Parker and Richard Boone. A decaying family awaiting the end of the world was the subject of The Sundial in 1958, and the following year she published perhaps her most enduring work, The Haunting of Hill House, which has justly been described as one of the greatest haunted house novels in literature. When she decided to write Hill House, says Joanne, what she did was take books out of the library on houses of New England where murders had occurred. She came across an account of a 19th century investigation of a haunted house and decided to go out and discover her own. I found it so exciting, she said, that I wanted more than anything else to set up my own haunted house and put my own people in it and see what I could make happen. Not only did she apparently discover one, but her research also revealed that it was built by her great-grandfather. Shirley could have created a house of enormous menace, horrifying implications, continues Joanne, without ever having left her study, but she liked to work it out, get a good lather. What she was trying to achieve was the feeling of a house substantial enough to be an entity on its own, says Barry, with enough substance that you could seriously believe it might also have a will. In 1961, Shirley Jackson won the Mystery Writers of America Edward Award for her story, Louisa Please, while her final novel, We Have Always Lived in the Castle, was published in 1963 and earned the National Book Award. I used to have to collect the mail, recalls Sarah. They would send the mail to the lottery lady, North Bennington, Vermont. She was the lottery lady. Sometimes letters came in, and that made my mother cry about the lottery and how it was some evil story. I remember growing up in the 1950s, says Lawrence, and there was certainly hostility from the townspeople because we were different. It was very hard to become accepted in New England village in only one generation. This was no exception. These people were only several generations removed from the folks in Salem who burnt witches. I got a whole slew of asides. Although the villagers had forgotten the ritual and lost the original black box, they still remembered to use stones. The pile of stones the boys had made earlier was ready. There were stones on the ground with the glowing scraps of paper that had come out of the box. From The Lottery by Shirley Jackson. I think there are few, if any, descriptive passages in the English language that are any finer than this. It is the sort of quiet epiphany every writer hopes for, words that somehow transcend words, words which add up to a total greater than the sum of the parts. Stephen King on The Haunting of Hill House. No live organism can continue for long to exist sanely under conditions of absolute reality. Even larks and katydids are supposed by some to dream. Hill House, not sane, stood by itself against its hills, holding darkness within. It had stood so for 80 years and might stand for 80 more. Within walls continued upright, bricks met neatly, floors were firm, and doors were sensibly shut. Silence lay steadily against the wood and stone of Hill House, and whatever walked there walked alone. From The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The concept of certain houses as unclean or forbidden, perhaps sacred, is as old as the mind of man. Certainly there are spots which inevitably attach to themselves an atmosphere of holiness and goodness. It might not then be too fanciful to say that some houses are born bad. Hill House, whatever the cause, has been unfit for human habitation for upwards of 20 years. From The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. The Haunting, UK, 1963, director Robert Wise, with Julie Harris, Claire Bloom, Richard Johnson, Russ Tamblyn, Faye Compton, Rosalie Crutchley, Argyle Metro Goldwyn Mayer, Black and White. Based on Shirley Jackson's classic novel, director Wise brings to the film many of the subtle atmospheric touches he learned while under the guidance of Val Lewton at RKO in the 1940s. Anthropologist Dr. Richard Marquay Johnson decides to open up the reputedly haunted Hill House after 80 years. With the help of Luke Tamblyn, the skeptical heir, and the two women who have already had contact with the supernatural, the lesbian psychic Theo Bloom and the repressed Eleanor Harris, he uncovers the restless spirits that haunt the New England mansion. Nelson Giddings' literate screenplay and David Bolton's excellent Panavision cinematography imbue the house with a palpably evil force. Scenes like the ghostly presence outside Eleanor and Theo's room, the phenomena surrounding the locked nursery, and the sudden appearance of Mrs. Markway's, Lois Maxwell's, face are genuine high points of terror in one of the finest horror films ever made. In a very real way, in spite of fine acting, fine direction, and a marvelous black and white photography of David Bolton, what we have in the Wise film is one of the world's few radio horror movies. Something is scratching at the ornate paneled door, something horrible, but it is a door Wise elects never to open. Stephen King on The Haunting. My name is Mary Catherine Blackwood. I am 18 years old, and I live with my sister Constance. I have often thought that my luck at all, I could have been born a werewolf because the two middle fingers on both my hands are the same length, but I have had to be content with what I had. I dislike washing myself, the dogs, and noise. I like my sister Constance and Richard Plangenet and Amita Felodios, the death cap mushroom. Everyone else in our family is dead. From We Have Always Lived in the Castle by Shirley Jackson. There was a huge flurry of negative, very venomous letters, remembers Joanne. You can't wade through that much venom without having a little bit stick to you. I think Shirley probably must have been unavoidably hurt by some of them. Suffering from bouts of depression and anxiety, Shirley Jackson left her final novel, the semi-autobiographical Come Along With Me, unfinished when she had a fatal heart attack in 1965 at the age of 45. The story of a middle-aged New England woman investigating the occult, it was included by her husband in a posthumous collection in 1968. I think Shirley Jackson's art was to tickle that nerve to remind you that at any moment the uncontrollable could start, says Barry. After her death, adds Sarah, her agent sent us a letter she had received a few days after Shirley died, in which she said, I'm going to be doing something very different soon, and I'll be in touch. And then we have a picture of the haunting. So that is S for Sorceress and the amazing Shirley Jackson. And because it's me, instead of talking about the obvious, most recent adaptations of her work, I want to talk about Lisa Tuttle. I have not read any of her work yet, but Horror Cafe is one of my favorite videos, and I'm going to drop it in the end card there because it's amazing. She's on there with Clive Barker, Peter Adkins, who, by the way, Peter Adkins is a very interesting and fun person, and you should follow him on Twitter because he is hilarious. And also, they just released a Hellraiser Bloodline, the original script that he had written. This is not what they filmed, so I highly recommend it. Hellraiser Bloodline, literally, that just got released. So yeah, sorry, back to Horror Cafe. Clive Barker, John Carpenter, Roger Corman, it is amazing. And it was just a one-off that they did. Seriously, watch the video. I'll put it in the deal. So next week we'll go to T for Torso, and we will be done last Wednesday of December with our entire book. Thank you for reading with me. Bye.